Hello, welcome back to Mrs. Torres' YouTube channel. Today we are in our new packet 7.4 to 7.6, and we're actually going to do two sections today. We're going to graph square roots and we're going to graph cube roots. So on page 1 in your packet, we're looking at number 4. Number 4 is y equals the square root of x. This is kind of the base of all of our square root functions. It's kind of what they're all going to look at or look like. It's just going to be moved around the graph, stretched, shrunk, so forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a table of values and then graph a few points, and that's what our graph will look like. I'm going to use a different color instead of a pencil here. So if we think about it, what our x values are going to be. Can our x's be negative? No, they can't be, right? If we take the square root of a negative number, we'll get an imaginary answer, and we don't graph imaginary numbers. These are only real numbers on this graph. So we're going to start with 0. And then we'll do a few more. How about 1, 2, and 3? So those are our x's plugged into our function to get our y. The square root of 0 will give you 0. The square root of 1 gives you 1. The next two, we will need our calculators. So the square root of 2, we'll round that to the nearest tenth and get 1.4. The square root of 3, round that to the nearest tenth, we'll call it 1.7. Okay, Esther? So let's graph these. 0, 0, right at our origin. 1, 1 is right there. 2, 1.4. So 2 and then 1.4. So that's kind of in the middle of 2 and 3. Or sorry, in the middle of 1 and 2, not 2 and 3. And then 3, 1.7. So 1, 2, 3. And then 1.7 is almost at 2, but not quite. So like right there. So our graph starts here and it goes up and then it'll go on forever. So that's what the graph of square roots will look like, just kind of moved around our coordinate plane. And we can graph this on our calculator, right? If I make this a little brighter for a second. So if we go to y equals, clear it out, the square root of x. Let's see what the graph looks like. That pretty much looks like our graph, right? So that's what it should look like. All right, let's graph a different one here. How about y equals negative 2/3 x plus 2, the square root of x plus 2 plus 3. So down here we started at 0 and we went to 3. Now underneath the square root we have x plus 2. Can x be a negative number in this case? We just can't have a negative under the square root, right? So if x was negative 1, negative 1 plus 2 gives you 1. So we would have a positive number. What if x is negative 2? That would give us negative 2 plus 2. That would give us 0 underneath. So as long as our number is negative 2 or higher, it's going to be on our graph. So let's do negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. Now, we could plug all these x's in, do the math, but there's a much easier way to complete our table. If we go to y equals and we plug in our function, so negative 2/3, you guys can use your fraction button. I don't have them on this calculator, it's a little older. So I just do my fraction like this. If you do it like this, make sure it's in parentheses. Times the square root of x plus 2. And then on the outside, we have plus 3. If you want, you can kind of preview what your graph will look like. So that's what our graph should look like. But we want to make sure we complete our table so we have points we can put on our graph. So we can go to second, table. And then notice I had negative 3 in here already, and it says error, right? Because that would give us a negative under the square root, and it's an imaginary number, so we can't graph it. So let's do -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. They were actually already there. I could have just left it, but that's okay. Oops. -1. There we go. So, -2, when x is -2, y is 3. When x is -1, we get 2.3. When x is 0, y is 2.1. When x is 1, y is 1.8. And then when x is 2, y is 1.7. All right, then we graph it. So -2, 3. So -2, 1, 2, +3. -1, and then 2.3. So that's about there. 0, 2.1. So that's about there. 1, 1.8. And then 2, 1.7. And then since we already previewed the graph, we know it's going to start here and go down. What I'm also going to ask you to do for these square root functions is state the domain and the range. The domain of these functions are possible x values. So we kind of already figured that out when we made our table, right? So our x values start at -2, and then they go up from there. So we're going to say x is greater than or equal to -2, because it can be -2 and any number greater than that. Our range are our possible y values. So our y values start up here at 3, and then they slowly go down, right? So that means...
Val DeVizio, please report to the main office. Dallies, Val DeVizio, please report to the main office. Thank you.
So our y's start at 3 and slowly go down. So that means y needs to be less than or equal to +3. We could do that same thing for our other function. So domain, it starts at 0, right? And then it gets bigger. So x is greater than or equal to 0. Our range, again, starts at 0. And this time we're going up, so it's going to be greater than or equal to 0. So whenever you're graphing square root functions, you will be asked for the domain and range. All right, in your packet, turn to page 4. Let's look at numbers 9 and 10. So now we're graphing cube root functions. So again, let's start with kind of the basic one, and then we'll do one where it's shifted and stretched. All right, let's do our, let's decide what our x values are going to be. So can our x be negative here? Can we take the cube root of a negative number? If you don't know, go to math. There's your cube root. Let's try -3. It doesn't give us an error, right? So we can take the cube root of negative numbers. If your index is odd, you can use a negative number. If it's even, it can't ever be a negative number underneath there. So let's just do -1, 0, 1, and 2. Let's actually do -2 as well. I know we're a little out of order, but that's okay. So the cube root, remember you go to math, number 4, the cube root of -1. That's going to give you -1. The cube root of 0 is going to be 0. The cube root of 1 will give you 1. 2 and negative 2, I don't know off the top of my head, so let's look at it. Math, number 4, the cube root of 2 is going to be 1.3. The cube root of negative 2 is just going to be the opposite of that, so negative 1.3. All right, let's graph these. So 0, 0, negative 1, negative 1, 1, 1, negative 2, and then 1.3, positive 2, and 1.3. So we've got all these points here. It looks like it could look like a line, but we know this isn't a linear equation, so it's not going to look what it's going to look like. So let's go ahead and graph it and see what it'll look like. So math, number 4, so cube root of x. So it starts from the left, kind of goes up a little bit, and then goes to the right. So start to the left, come up here, it does a little curve there, and then goes to the right forever. Cube root functions, if we think about the domain and range, are possible x values. There are no restrictions on x, so that would be all reals. If we think about the range, there's also no restriction. So your domain and range of a cube root function will always be all reals. So easy peasy. Domain, all reals, range, also all reals. All right, let's look at number 10 and then we are done. So there's no restriction on what can go underneath here, right? It could be negative, it could be 0, it could be positive. So let's just go negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. That's a pretty safe bet. Let's use our calculator to fill in our table here. Nice time saver. So negative 4 plus the cube root of x plus 5. So notice how it looks very similar to this function, it's just shifted down to the left a little bit. So now let's go to our table. I already have most of my values filled in here. So negative 2 gives us negative 2.6, negative 1 gives us negative 2.4, 0 is negative 2.3, 1 is negative 2.2, 2 is negative 2.1. Now notice how these y's are pretty close together. If we look at the graph, negative 2 is here, and then positive 2 is here. So all of these are on this half of our curve. We don't have any down here or any close to here, right? So let's try some more values. Let's try like a bigger value like negative, how about negative 5 and negative 7. Just so we can get some values that are down here that we can graph on our picture. So table, when x is negative 5, y is negative 4. When x is negative 7, y is negative 5.3. So that'll give us kind of a better idea of what our graph will look like. So let's graph some of these. So, excuse me, I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. So negative 7 and then negative 5.3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Somewhere in the middle there. Negative 5, 4. Negative 4. So negative 5, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we'll do some of these. So negative 2, negative 2.6. So that's there. 0, negative 2.3. So 0, negative 2.3. And then let's do one more. How about 2, negative 2.1. So then we can kind of look at our graph. So it's going to come negative 5, 4. So it's going to come up like this. All right, and then domain and range are gonna again be all reals there. All right, see you next time.